Have you ever been given a gift that was really a weapon? A present that felt less like an act of love and more like a Trojan horse wheeled right into the heart of your life? I have. For my 70th birthday, my son Ryan gave me a small, sleek cylinder of black plastic and mesh fabric that promised to make my life easier. He called it the Ecosphere 360. I would later come to call it the Spy. It sat on my mantelpiece for a month, a silent, listening sentinel, and in that time, it almost broke me. But then it became the very tool of my liberation. This isn't a story about a simple family squabble. It's a story about trust, control, and the quiet betrayals that can curdle love into something unrecognizable. It's about being underestimated, about being seen not as a person with a lifetime of experience, but as a problem to be managed, a set of assets to be controlled. My son thought he was smart. He thought he was playing chess, moving me around the board like a helpless pawn. What he didn't know was that my grandson, his own son, had decided to flip the whole board over. And what he was hearing wasn't the truth. It was a performance, a month-long, meticulously crafted lie designed for an audience of one. And he never suspected a thing. So, if you have a moment, pour yourself a cup of tea. I want to tell you how I took back my own story, one fake conversation at a time. End of YouTube video intro. The silence in this house is different now. It used to be a heavy thing. A silence thick with unspoken words and the weight of my husband Mark's absence. After he passed, the quiet felt like a presence in itself, a constant reminder of the half of me that was missing. But now, the silence is light. It's clean. It's the sound of privacy, the simple, profound luxury of knowing your words belong only to you. The Ecosphere 360 is gone, of course. I keep its empty box in the back of my closet, a small, square reminder of how close I came to losing myself. It all started, as these things so often do, with good intentions, or at least, that's the label Ryan pasted over his actions. My son, Ryan. He's a man who irons his socks. He organizes his pantry by expiration date and food group. He believes that anything that cannot be quantified on a spreadsheet is a dangerous variable. For 40 years, while Mark was alive, Ryan's meticulous nature was a family quirk. Mark and I ran our own small hardware store, a business we built from sawdust and grit. We handled the books together, navigated recessions, and managed our investments with a steady hand. We weren't Wall Street wizards, but we were comfortable. We were independent. Mark used to joke that Ryan got his obsession with numbers from me, but his inability to see the people behind them was all his own. After Mark died, that quirk in Ryan's personality metastasized. His concern for my well-being began to feel less like love and more like an audit. He'd come over for dinner, and his eyes would scan the room, not for what was there, but for what he perceived was out of place. A stack of mail on the counter was evidence of disorganization. A new throw pillow on the sofa was a sign of frivolous spending. He started with gentle suggestions, forwarding me articles with titles like "Is Your Retirement Portfolio Properly Diversified?" and "The Top 10 Signs Your Parents Need Financial Oversight." I tolerated it. I told myself it was his way of grieving, of trying to control a world that had just proven how uncontrollable it could be. I would smile and say, "Thank you, Ryan, that's very thoughtful," and then I'd delete the email. What was I supposed to do? He's my son. I loved him, even when his love felt like it was squeezing the air from my lungs. I was still navigating the raw landscape of widowhood, and I didn't have the strength for a fight. That, I now see, was my mistake. He mistook my grief for incompetence, my silence for acquiescence. Then came my 70th birthday. My daughter Clara, Leo's mother, threw a lovely party in my backyard. It was a perfect early autumn day. The air was crisp, the chrysanthemums were in full bloom, and I was surrounded by people I loved. Clara, my rock, my sister Beatrice, my grandson Leo, who at 16 was already taller than me, and possessed a quiet intelligence that reminded me so much of Mark. And Ryan, of course, with his wife, who always looked vaguely apologetic, as if she were perpetually sorry for the conversational edges he was about to create. After we cut the cake, Ryan stood up, holding a beautifully wrapped box. He cleared his throat, tapping a fork against his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice filled with a practiced sincerity that always set my teeth on edge. "To my mother Eva, 70 years young. We all want her to be safe, to be connected, and to have the world at her fingertips. So, I got her something to help with that." He handed me the box. It was the Ecosphere 360. "It's a smart hub, Mom," he explained, as I unwrapped it. "You can ask it the weather, have it play music, call any of us with just your voice. It's about security. It's about convenience. It's about us knowing you're okay." Everyone applauded. It seemed like such a thoughtful modern gift. I felt a pang of guilt for my initial, reflexive suspicion. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe he was just trying to help, in his own clumsy, spreadsheet-driven way. I thanked him and gave him a hug. His hug was firm, proprietary, a hug that said, "I am managing this situation." He set it up on the mantelpiece, right in the center of the living room. "I already pre-configured it for you, Mom," he said, waving away the instruction manual I reached for. "It's linked to my account, so it's all seamless. Just plug it in, and you're good to go." And that was the hook. Linked to my account. The words floated past me in the happy chaos of the party, but they settled somewhere deep in my subconscious, a tiny worrying splinter. The first few days, the device was a novelty. I'd ask it for the time while I was baking. I'd have it play Vivaldi in the afternoons. It was fine, but I couldn't shake a feeling of being watched. The single, unblinking blue light that glowed when it was listening felt less like an indicator and more like an eye. The moment of truth came about a week later. I was on the phone with my dearest friend, Cora. We've been friends since our children were in diapers. I can tell Cora anything. I was telling her, in a fit of pique, about a small, foolish investment I'd made. I'd bought a few shares of a trendy tech company on a whim, and they had promptly dropped by 20%. It was $1,000. In the grand scheme of my finances, it was a pittance, a lesson learned. It was embarrassing, but not catastrophic. "I feel like such an old fool, Cora," I remember saying with a laugh. "Mark would have told me to stick to index funds." The very next day, Ryan called. His voice had that strained casualness I had come to dread. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How's everything?" "Everything is fine, dear. I was just about to water the hydrangeas." "Good, good," he said, then a pause. "Listen, Mom, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I was thinking, maybe it's time I took a more active role in looking at your portfolio. Just to make sure everything is optimized. We wouldn't want you making any emotional decisions with your money, like with tech stocks, for example. It's a volatile market." The world seemed to stop, the blood drained from my face, and the cheerful yellow walls of my kitchen suddenly felt cold and hostile. Tech stocks. He had used the exact phrase. There was absolutely no way he could have known. I hadn't told anyone but Cora. The call had taken place in my living room, with the phone in my hand and the Ecosphere sitting silently on the mantel. My mind raced, connecting the dots with a terrifying speed. The gift, the pre-configuration, linked to my account. The feature he'd touted as a safety measure, the ability to drop in and speak through the device, wasn't just for emergencies, it was a key to my private life. He wasn't just worried about me, he was investigating me, he was building a case. Every word I spoke in my own home was being collected as evidence to be used against me, to support his inevitable claim that I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. The betrayal was so profound, so icy and complete, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. The gift wasn't a gift, it was a wiretap, and my own son was on the other end of the line. I don't remember how I ended that phone call. I think I mumbled something about the kettle boiling, and hung up. My hand was shaking so violently, I had to set the phone down on the counter. I stared at the black cylinder on the mantelpiece. It looked alien now, a malevolent presence in the room I had shared with my husband for 45 years. This was my home, my sanctuary, and he had violated it in the most intimate way possible. My first impulse was pure, unadulterated rage. I walked over, yanked the cord from the wall, and threw the device into a drawer, slamming it shut. But the rage quickly curdled into something else, something colder and heavier, a deep, hollow sense of despair. He didn't trust me. After everything, after a lifetime of being a responsible, capable person, my own son saw me as a child, a liability. The disrespect was staggering. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about control. He wanted to strip me of my autonomy, piece by piece, until I was utterly dependent on him, another column on his perfectly balanced life spreadsheet. I sank into my favorite armchair, the one Mark always used to sit in, and the tears I had been holding back since that phone call finally came. They weren't loud, hiccuping sobs, but silent, hot tears of humiliation and grief. Grief for the relationship I thought I had with my son. Grief for the trust that had been so casually shattered. In that moment, I felt utterly alone and powerless. What could I do? Confront him? He would deny it, of course. He would twist it, reframe it as concern, and call me paranoid and ungrateful. He would make me the villain of the story, the crazy old woman who couldn't appreciate her loving, worried son. My mind drifted back, sifting through years of memories, looking for the origin of this chasm between us. I thought of Mark, in his last few months, when the illness had taken his strength, but not his clarity. We had many long talks. He worried about me being alone, not about the finances. He never doubted my ability to handle things for a second, but about my spirit. He knew Ryan. He saw the controlling streak even then. Eva, he had said one afternoon, his hand resting on mine, his skin thin as paper, promise me something. His voice was a reedy whisper, but his eyes were clear and direct. Don't let Ryan's worrying wear you down. He thinks love is a checklist. He doesn't understand that it's about trust. Your strength is quiet, Eva. You've always been the steel spine of this family. Don't ever let him mistake your quiet for weakness. I had promised him. I won't, Mark. I promise. But had I kept that promise? For the past 2 years, I had done nothing but yield. I had let his condescending comments slide. I had accepted his helpful intrusions. I did it because I was trying to keep the peace, to hold the tattered edges of our family together after Mark was gone, just as I thought he would have wanted. But sitting there in that silent, violated house, I realized Mark hadn't asked me to keep the peace. He had asked me to be strong, and I had been failing him. I had been failing myself. This long period of passivity, this slow erosion of my own boundaries, hadn't been kindness or family loyalty. It was fear, fear of confrontation, fear of upsetting the delicate balance, fear of being the difficult mother. And it had led me here, to a place where my son felt he had the right to eavesdrop on my private life. My mind went further back, to when the kids were younger. Ryan had always been the squeaky wheel. He had a knack for creating crises that only my and Mark's money could solve. There was the revolutionary.com business he started in his 20s, which vaporized $50,000 of our savings in 6 months. We bailed him out. When he bought his first house, he was short on the down payment. We wrote the check, telling ourselves it was an advance on his inheritance. His sister Clara never asked for a thing. She put herself through state college with a combination of scholarships and part-time jobs. She met her husband, started a family, and lived a modest, responsible life. She was competent and self-sufficient, and for that, Ryan seemed to resent her. He saw her independence not as a virtue, but as a judgment on his own perpetual neediness. He saw our support for him not as a gift, but as his due. He was the golden child, not because he was exceptional, but because he was exceptionally demanding. And we, his parents, had enabled it. We had taught him that his wants superseded everything else. The pattern of his concern had escalated so gradually since Mark's death that I had almost failed to see it as a concerted campaign. First, the casual questions about the will, just to make sure everything is in order, Mom. Then came the slick brochures for luxury senior living communities left on the hall table, as if by accident. The worst was his push for me to sign a durable power of attorney. He had it all drawn up by his lawyer. "It's just a precaution, Mom," he'd said, spreading the papers on my dining room table. "If something happens, if you get sick, this just allows me to step in and pay your bills, to manage things so you don't have to worry." I remember the cold knot of dread in my stomach as I looked at the legal jargon. It felt like my own obituary. I had refused, politely but firmly. "Thank you, Ryan, but I'm not ready for that. I'm perfectly capable of paying my own bills." The look of frustration on his face was startling. It wasn't the look of a concerned son who had been gently rebuffed. It was the look of a CEO whose quarterly projections had just been torpedoed. That should have been my wake-up call. The smart device was not a new strategy. It was merely a new, more insidious tool in a long-running war of attrition. I must have sat in that chair for hours. The sun set, casting long shadows across the living room. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, feeling the full, crushing weight of it all. This was my low point, the moment where I felt the fight had gone out of me completely. He had won. The following Sunday, Clara and Leo came for dinner. I tried to act normal, but my heart wasn't in it. I moved through the motions of cooking the pot roast and mashing the potatoes like an automaton. The easy chatter that usually filled my kitchen was replaced by a strained silence, punctuated only by my monosyllabic answers. Clara, being Clara, noticed immediately. She followed me into the kitchen as I was getting the gravy. "Mom, what's wrong? You've been quiet all week. Is it about the birthday?" I just shook my head, unable to find the words. It was Leo who broke the dam. He was looking at the empty spot on the mantelpiece, a small frown on his face. "Grandma, where's the ecosphere thing Dad gave you?" And just like that, it all came tumbling out. The story of the phone call, the tech stocks, the pre-configured account, the sickening realization. I told them everything, my voice barely a whisper at first, then growing stronger with the sheer injustice of it all. When I finished, I felt drained, empty. Clara's face was a mask of fury. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "That's it," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I'm calling him. This is beyond the pale, Mom. This is, I don't even have a word for it. It's despicable." She reached for her phone, ready to unleash a torrent of righteous anger on her brother. And a part of me wanted her to. A part of me craved the explosion, the confrontation, the satisfaction of seeing him squirm. But Leo, my quiet, thoughtful grandson, put a hand on his mother's arm. "Wait," he said. He hadn't said a word the whole time I was talking, just listened with an intensity that was rare in a 16-year-old. He walked over to the drawer where I'd thrown the device, took it out, and turned it over and over in his hands. He wasn't looking at it like a home appliance. He was looking at it like a puzzle, a piece of hardware with vulnerabilities. Confronting him is what he expects. "Grandma," Leo said, his eyes meeting mine. They were Mark's eyes, clear, intelligent, and with a spark of something I hadn't seen before. "Mischief. He'll just deny it and call you crazy. He's already got his story ready. What if we don't give him what he expects?" He paused, a slow smile spreading across his face. "What if we give him exactly what he's listening for?" And in that instant, something shifted inside me. The despair, the heavy, suffocating blanket of it, began to lift. It was replaced by a flicker of something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. A cold, sharp, and utterly delicious resolve. Clara looked from Leo to me, her anger giving way to confusion, and then to dawning understanding. The storm I had been weathering for 2 years wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I was no longer just clinging to the wreckage. I was finally ready to learn how to sail. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice. But if I'm being honest with you, and with myself, that was the moment it started to be about revenge too. Leo became my general, and my living room became our war room. He laid out the plan with the calm, methodical clarity of a seasoned strategist. It was brilliant in its simplicity and its audacity. He explained that just unplugging the device or blocking Ryan's access through my Wi-Fi router would be too obvious. Ryan would see the device go offline in his app and would know I was on to him. The game would be over before it began. "No," Leo said, tapping his finger on the plastic cylinder. "We don't want him to know we're on to him. We want him to think he's winning. We want him to get more and more confident that his little spy toy is working perfectly." He explained the concept to me in terms I could understand. A man-in-the-middle attack, he called it. It sounded like something from a spy movie. He would essentially hijack the signal. Instead of the Ecosphere's microphone sending its live feed directly to Amazon's servers and then to Ryan's phone, Leo would reroute it. He'd insert his own laptop into the chain. The device would send its signal to his computer first. His computer would then send a completely different audio feed, our audio feed, onward to its destination. To Ryan, everything would look and sound perfectly normal. He'd be listening to my living room, just as he intended. He just wouldn't be listening to the real living room. "We can make him hear anything we want," Leo said, the excitement evident in his voice. "Literally anything." This was our hidden leverage, Ryan's own arrogance, his unshakable belief in his own cleverness, and my supposed dotage was the vulnerability Leo was going to exploit. He wanted evidence that I was losing my mind, that I was financially incompetent. Fine, we would give him evidence in spades. We would construct a narrative so outlandish, so perfectly tailored to his worst fears, that he would have no choice but to believe it. The brainstorming sessions were some of the most enjoyable days I'd had in years. It was me, Leo, and Clara, huddled around my kitchen table with notepads and steaming mugs of coffee. We were a team. The feeling was intoxicating. For the first time, I wasn't just a passive victim of Ryan's machinations. I was an active architect of his downfall. "It has to be something that involves liquidating everything," I said, thinking aloud. "That's his primary fear, that the money he already considers his will disappear. And you have to go somewhere he can't follow or track you." Clara added, getting into the spirit of it. Somewhere with no paper trail. Leo was scrolling through something on his phone, a thoughtful look on his face. What about Alaska? He said, like an off-grid community, no cell service, no internet, no banks, people who live completely off the land. It was perfect. It was dramatic. It was irreversible. It was everything that would send a control freak like Ryan into a tailspin. The idea took root and blossomed into a fully fledged narrative. Eva, grieving widow and supposedly vulnerable senior, had fallen under the spell of a charismatic financial advisor who was convincing me to embrace a new philosophy of asset freedom. I would sell my house, liquidate my entire stock portfolio, cash out my life insurance, and convert it all into untraceable assets, gold, maybe diamonds, to take with me to a remote, self-sustaining commune in the wilds of Alaska. Of course, to make this believable, I couldn't just be talking to myself. I needed a co-conspirator. I immediately thought of Cora. When I called and explained the situation, the spying, the plan, the need for a convincing performance, she didn't hesitate for a second. That miserable little worm, she shrieked into the phone with such force, I had to hold it away from my ear. Of course I'll do it, Eva. What's my part? Cora had been a high school drama teacher for 30 years. This wasn't a prank to her. It was a role. We decided she would play the part of the financial advisor. We needed a name that sounded both authoritative and slightly slippery. We settled on Bartholomew Croft. We gave him a backstory, a deregistered financial guru who now operated on a spiritual economic plane, helping clients achieve true liberation from the shackles of the system. Cora developed a voice for him, a smooth, unctuous baritone, with a habit of clicking his tongue before making a particularly profound point. The next 2 weeks were dedicated to production. Leo turned my study, with its wood-paneled walls and thick carpet, into a makeshift recording studio. He bought a professional-grade microphone that looked like something out of a 1940s radio play. He showed me how to speak into it, how to avoid popping my peps. We wrote scripts. Clara, who has a writer's mind, helped us plot out a whole arc for my decline. We started small. The first recording was just a short introductory call with Bartholomew. I played the part of a hesitant but intrigued new client. Cora was magnificent. She spoke of monetary energy, decoupling from the grid, and the Alaskan Sovereignty Project. Then we escalated. We recorded long, detailed conversations. We talked about specific stocks I owned, faking my end of the conversation, as if I were reading from a real statement. Yes, Bartholomew, I see the shares in Procter & Gamble. You think we should liquidate those first? We made sure to use words that would be like catnip to Ryan. Untraceable, offshore, non-jurisdictional. We layered in details to make it feel real. In one recording, we had my doorbell ring in the middle of the call. I put Bartholomew on hold, and we recorded me having a brief, flustered conversation with a fake delivery person. Leo downloaded sound effects, a kettle whistling, a distant siren, the rustle of papers, and mixed them into the background. To add that layer of what the kids call plausible inaccuracy, we invented financial instruments. We had Bartholomew rave about the benefits of something called a Svalbard domiciled bearer bond, which sounds impressive but is complete gibberish. We discussed the legalities of cashing in my pension and moving it to an unregulated Alaskan territorial trust, a concept we knew would make Ryan's blood run cold. We even had a very serious discussion about the best way to transport gold bullion without tripping federal reporting requirements. I had to practice saying bullion instead of bullion. We had a good laugh over that one during an outtake, a moment of pure joy in the midst of our conspiracy. Leo was in his element. He showed me the technical side of his plan, and while I didn't understand all of it, I understood the elegance of it. He set up a dedicated mini computer, a Raspberry Pi, that would live in his bedroom. It would be the server that hosted all our audio files. He wrote a script that would randomly select from our dozens of recordings and play them on a loop. There were hours and hours of audio, the Bartholomew calls, faked phone calls with Cora, where I gushed about my new life plan, calls to imaginary travel agents and Alaskan real estate brokers. Between these stage conversations, the script would play ambient noise he'd recorded in my house, the ticking of the grandfather clock, me humming as I washed dishes, the sound of the television playing a game show in the background. It would be a seamless 24/7's audio illusion. He also built a logging feature. Every time Dad's phone pings the server to get the audio stream, Leo explained, his fingers flying across the keyboard, it'll log his IP address and the timestamp. We'll have a complete record of every single time he listens in. We'll know exactly how obsessed he is. Finally, the day came. Leo arrived after school with his laptop. "Ready to go live, Grandma?" he asked with a grin. I took a deep breath. Ready as I'll ever be. He took the Echo Sphere, plugged it back into the wall outlet on the mantel, and sat down on the sofa. For about an hour, he typed silently, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. The process was quiet, anticlimactic. There were no sparks, no dramatic fanfare. Finally, he closed the laptop and looked up at me. "The stage is set," he said, his voice full of quiet pride. "The play is in motion, and the audience is waiting." I looked at the black cylinder, its blue light glowing softly. It no longer looked malevolent. It looked like an instrument, our instrument. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for the mouse to take the cheese. For the first 3 days, we did nothing. Leo's script just played the ambient sounds of my empty house. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator. We wanted Ryan to get used to the baseline, to believe everything was back to normal after my brief, paranoid unplugging of the device. Let him think I'd come to my senses. On the 4th day, Leo, monitoring his logs from his bedroom miles away, sent me a text. "He's listening. Let's give him the opening act." That evening, the first recorded conversation between me and Bartholomew Croft went into the rotation. It was a 45-minute track. I was at my sister Beatrice's house for dinner, miles away from the living room where my private conversation was supposedly taking place. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. It contained only a screenshot of the access log. Ryan's IP address had connected the moment our audio file started, and it disconnected the moment it ended. He had listened to the entire thing. He was hooked. The reaction was almost immediate. The next morning, Ryan called. His voice was a study in forced nonchalance, an amateur actor trying to pretend he hadn't just read the script. "Hey, Mom. Just calling to check in. See how you are." "I'm fine, Ryan. I was just about to do a little weeding in the garden before it gets too hot." I kept my voice light, breezy, the perfect picture of a clueless old lady obsessed with her petunias. "Good, good," he said. And then the probe. Anything new, any exciting plans on the horizon. The sheer audacity of it nearly made me laugh out loud. I could picture him, sitting in his sterile home office, a headset on, listening to a recording of me, planning to liquidate my life savings, while simultaneously asking me on the phone if I had any exciting plans. The man's hypocrisy was bottomless. "Oh, you know me," I chirped. "The most exciting plan I have is deciding whether to plant tulips or daffodils this fall. The usual." "Right, the usual," he repeated, his voice tight with a frustration he was struggling to conceal. "Well, okay then. Talk soon." He hung up. A minute later, my phone buzzed again. A text from Leo. He's listening to the Bartholomew recording again. Right now, while he was on the phone with you. That's when I knew for sure that this would work. His obsession was so total, his belief in my senility so absolute, that he couldn't even conceive of the possibility that he was being played. He was so busy looking for the forest that he couldn't see the artificial trees. Over the next few weeks, we became more brazen. We escalated the narrative. We dropped a new Bartholomew call every few days. We had me talking about opening an account at a bank in the Cayman Islands as a transitional step. We had Bartholomew coaching me on how to handle questions from nosy family members. Cora was a genius. She even threw in a line about how true liberation requires a temporary severance from those tethered to the old ways. The logs from Leo's server told the story of Ryan's spiraling panic. He was listening for hours every day, in the morning before work, during his lunch break, late at night. He was addicted to the audio feed, mainlining our fabricated drama. His real-world behavior became more and more erratic. He started stopping by unannounced. I'd be in the garden, covered in dirt, and his car would pull into the driveway. He would walk in, his eyes darting around the living room, scanning the shelves, the tables. What was he looking for? A half-packed suitcase? A map of Alaska? Stacks of gold bars? His gaze would land on the ecosphere, and I could almost see the thought bubble over his head. It's all in there. The proof is in there. I, of course, was the picture of serene ignorance. I'd offer him a glass of iced tea. I'd talk about the aphids on my roses. I'd ask about his wife, his job. I was a blank wall of pleasantries, and it was driving him insane. One afternoon, he cornered me in the kitchen. He dispensed with the fake casualness. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling slightly. "Mom, we need to have a serious talk about your finances." I continued wiping down the counter, my movements slow and deliberate. "What about them?" "I'm worried," he said, his voice taking on that condescending, patronizing tone he used when he was about to explain something to his dear, simple-minded mother. "I'm worried you're being rash, that you're not thinking clearly, that someone might be taking advantage of you." I stopped wiping and turned to face him. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I looked him directly in the eye. "Ryan," I said, my voice perfectly level, "I appreciate your concern, truly, but I am 70 years old. I helped your father run a business for 40 years. I have managed my own money my entire adult life. I think I know what I'm doing." The look on his face was a mixture of fury, frustration, and utter helplessness. He had all this evidence, this secret knowledge he was gathering, but he couldn't use it. He couldn't say, "But Mom, I heard you on the spy cam I put in your house." He was trapped in a prison of his own making. He had built the cage, and now he was rattling its bars. The contrast was beautiful. His mounting, noisy panic, and my quiet, unshakable calm. He left that day, looking more agitated than ever. The silent takeover was working perfectly. The more he listened, the less power he had. Ryan's desperation reached its crescendo about a month into our little operation. Like a cornered animal, he did the only thing he could think of. He tried to recruit an army. He called a family meeting, not a casual get-together, but a formal sit-down intervention. He summoned my daughter Clara and my sister Beatrice to my house on a Saturday afternoon. He told them it was an emergency concerning my health and well-being. Clara, of course, knew exactly what was coming and played her part beautifully, feigning worried confusion on the phone with him. Beatrice, my older sister, was a different story. Bea is a pragmatist, a no-nonsense retired nurse, who has a low tolerance for drama. Ryan knew he'd need her on his side if he wanted to present a united front. He was about to try and sell them a story. What he didn't know was that the lead actress and the director were already in the audience. They arrived at 2 o'clock. I had a tray of cookies and a pitcher of lemonade on the coffee table, the perfect picture of domestic tranquility. Ryan, by contrast, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He was carrying a worn leather briefcase, which he placed on the table with a thud. It was his box of evidence. He was about to make his case. He cleared his throat, a nervous, jerky movement. "Thank you all for coming," he began, trying to adopt the tone of a responsible family patriarch. "I know this is difficult, but we need to talk about Mom." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in his spiky, aggressive handwriting. "I have reason to believe," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of feigned concern and genuine panic, "that Mom is in the midst of a serious cognitive decline. She's fallen under the influence of a predator, a con man, who is convincing her to liquidate every asset she has." Clara and Beatrice exchanged a glance. I kept my expression placid, taking a slow sip of lemonade. "His name," Ryan announced with dramatic flair, "is Bartholomew Croft. He's a financial guru, and he's convinced her to sell the house, sell her stocks, everything, and move to some kind of off-grid survivalist community in Alaska." He paused, letting the bombshell hang in the air. He was clearly expecting gasps of horror, expressions of shock. Instead, he got polite confusion. Clara was the first to speak, her brow furrowed in a masterful performance of concern. "Alaska? That's odd. Dad always hated the cold. He used to say anything below 70 degrees was uncivilized. Why on earth would she want to go to Alaska?" Then Beatrice chimed in, her practical nurse's mind kicking in. "Eva, that doesn't make any sense. You just told me on the phone yesterday you were getting a referral to the orthopedist. You're finally going to get your knee replaced. You can't rehabilitate a knee replacement in an igloo." Ryan was visibly floundering. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. His allies were not falling in line. "No, you don't understand," he insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "It's all true. He's manipulating her. She's being brainwashed." "Ryan, dear," I said, my voice soft as velvet, "I think you're overreacting. I did look at a travel brochure for an Alaskan cruise. Maybe that's what you've misunderstood. I had, in fact, left one such brochure on the coffee table a week prior, just to add another layer to the misdirection." "No," he almost shouted, his composure completely cracking. He was losing control of the room, of the narrative he had so carefully constructed in his head. In his desperation, he made his final fatal mistake. He stood up, his hand shaking, and pointed a trembling finger at the black cylinder on the mantelpiece. "I have proof," he cried, his voice raw. "I've heard it. I've heard her talking to him for hours. She's planning it all. It's on that. She's being manipulated, and the evidence is right there, on that device." The room fell silent. The admission, the confession he had been trying to avoid for a month, was finally out. Clara and Beatrice turned to look at him, their expressions shifting from confusion to dawning horror. They weren't looking at a concerned son anymore. They were looking at a spy. The moment hung in the air, thick and heavy. Ryan seemed to realize what he had just admitted. The mask of concern ripped away to show the ugly, controlling face beneath. He had confessed to eavesdropping on his own mother in front of the very people he was trying to recruit to his side. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked at the ecosphere, then back at my son, and I asked the question that sealed his fate. My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the tension in the room like a surgeon's scalpel. "You've been listening, Ryan?" His face, which had been flushed with agitation, turned a pasty, sickly white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. he stammered, his eyes darting between me, his sister, and his aunt, looking for an escape that wasn't there. I was worried, he finally choked out. It was for your own good, to protect you. The excuse sounded pathetic, even to his own ears. The air of authority he always wore had evaporated, leaving behind only a panicked, guilty man. And that's when my secret weapon made his entrance. As if on cue, the back door opened, and my grandson Leo walked in. He had been waiting in the garden with his laptop. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He walked calmly over to the coffee table, right in front of where Ryan was standing, and turned his laptop around for all to see. On the screen was Leo's log file. It was a spreadsheet, Ryan's favorite form of communication. But this spreadsheet didn't have numbers and projections. It had dates, timestamps, IP addresses. It was a meticulous, undeniable record of Ryan's obsession. Monday, 8:15 a.m. Duration 47 minutes. Monday, 12:30 p.m. Duration 92 minutes. Monday, 11:05 p.m. Duration 18 minutes. Day after day, week after week. An entire month of his secret listening habits, displayed in cold, hard black and white. It was the complete architecture of his betrayal. Ryan stared at the screen, his face a canvas of pure horror and disbelief. He looked from the laptop to Leo, and then to me, the comprehension finally dawning. He hadn't been a clever detective uncovering a conspiracy. He had been the sole audience for a play written just for him. But Leo wasn't finished. With a single keystroke, a smooth, unctuous voice filled the room, not from the echosphere, but from the laptop speakers. Asterisk. My dear Eva, the monetary energy requires us to decouple from the grid. It was Bartholomew Croft. Cora's magnificent performance, echoing through the living room. Ryan flinched, as if he'd been struck. And then Leo delivered the coup de grace. He clicked his mouse again. The recording of Bartholomew stopped, and a new track began. It was my voice, but not the voice of the hesitant, manipulated woman from the recordings. This was me, laughing, a deep, genuine belly laugh. Then another voice, Leo's. Asterisk. Cut. Cut. Grandma, you have to sound more convinced. And it's bullion, not bullion. You're not buying soup. Asterisk. The outtakes. He played the outtakes. He played a clip of Cora flubbing a line and swearing colorfully, followed by my and Leo's laughter. He played a clip of Clara suggesting a plot point. Asterisk. What if she talks about hiding the gold in the old well? He'll lose his mind. Asterisk. The entire deception, the whole elaborate month-long charade, was laid bare. The room was utterly, profoundly silent, save for the sound of our recorded laughter coming from the laptop. Ryan stood frozen, his face a mask of such complete and total humiliation that for a fleeting moment I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. He understood everything now. The casual questions, the unannounced visits, my infuriating calm. It had all been a performance. He hadn't been gathering intelligence. He'd been fed fiction. He wasn't a savvy protector. He was a gullible fool, dancing on the end of a string, held by his incompetent mother and his teenage son. The charade was over, and it had ended not with a bang, but with the sound of our laughter. It was Beatrice who spoke first. She looked at her nephew with a level of disgust I had never seen on her face before. You spied on your own mother, she said. It wasn't a question, it was a judgment. Clara stood up and walked to the door, holding it open. I think you should leave, Ryan, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. It was colder and more final than any angry shouting could ever have been. Ryan looked at me one last time. There was no apology in his eyes. There was no remorse. There was just the blank, hollowed-out look of defeat. He saw me, really saw me, for the first time in years. He didn't see a doddering old woman or a financial liability. He saw the person who had comprehensively and quietly outmaneuvered him at every turn. He picked up his briefcase of useless notes, walked out the door without another word, and Clara shut it firmly behind him. The power in our family had just shifted permanently, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. In the weeks that followed, the dust began to settle. Ryan sent a barrage of texts. At first, they were angry and accusatory, blaming me, blaming Leo for humiliating him. Then, when he got no response, the tone shifted to one of pleading. Long, rambling paragraphs about how he was only trying to help, how his concern was genuine, how we had been cruel. They were the words of a man who still didn't understand the fundamental nature of his transgression. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. I never replied. There was nothing left to say. The trust was not just broken, it had been ground into dust and scattered to the winds. Maybe one day, years from now, something new can be built, but it will never be what it was. And I have made my peace with that. The experience, as painful as it was, became a catalyst for real positive change. I didn't move to Alaska, of course, but sitting down with Clara, I realized that while Ryan's methods were abhorrent, his underlying panic did highlight a vulnerability, not in my mind, but in my legal planning. So I did see a real financial advisor, a highly recommended woman named Miss Albright, who didn't speak of monetary energy once, and a very good estate lawyer. Together with Clara by my side as my witness and advisor, we set up an ironclad, irrevocable trust. We fortified my will. We put legal structures in place that are so solid, so untouchable, that my financial independence is guaranteed for the rest of my life. Ryan's name is not on a single document. My finances are now more secure, and more importantly, more private than they have ever been. And I started living again, really living. Cora and I booked that trip to Italy we'd been talking about for a decade. We're leaving in the spring. I'm going to see the Amalfi Coast and drink wine in Tuscany. I spend 2 afternoons a week volunteering at the local library, helping adults learn to read. I'm spending more time with Clara's family. I'm taking my new knee, once it's healed, on long hikes with Leo, who delights in pointing out every bird and plant. He received a full scholarship to a prestigious university for computer engineering. He's going to change the world one day. That boy, in a way, he's already changed mine. You know, for years, I allowed my son's concern to feel like a cage. A comfortable cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. I thought keeping the peace, being the good mother, meant letting him have the power, letting him define my reality. But I've learned that peace, at the expense of your dignity, isn't peace at all, it's surrender. Sometimes the very people who claim they want to protect you are the ones you need protection from. My son set out on a mission to prove I was incompetent, but in the end, the only incompetence he managed to prove was his own. He thought he was listening to my downfall, but all he really heard was the sound of his own arrogance echoing back at him. So I have to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Do you think I went too far, or was it a perfectly measured response? I'd be fascinated to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and your perspectives, they give me strength. And if my story resonated with you, if it felt validating in any way, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. You never know who might need to hear that it's never too late to flip the board over. Thank you for listening.